This is my flu game.
This is the worst.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. No, I'm just very sick. Hello, and welcome to the Worst Fantasy Show. I am your host with the least, Jack Lucenay. And today the least I have is my fucking voice, which is on its way out. So we'll try and smash through this episode as swiftly as possible. If you guys are new here, thank you so much for joining. Please smash that like and subscribe button. Go ahead and leave some comments. On today's show, we're going to be going through Hearts and Farts, which is my version of Studs and Duds. And then we're going to hit some waivers. But before we get into all that, I always like to touch base and touch grass. What did I get right and what did I get wrong? Some early victory laps. But let's humble ourselves first. Let's always start with, what did I get wrong?
What in the fuck?
So Josh Allen is still very much a fantasy quarterback one, it seems. Now, granted, it was slow to get rolling against the Cardinals. Cardinals, not a great defense, so he could have some struggles against better defenses. But yeah, I had predicted that he would fall out of the top 10. It's not looking like that's going to happen. He's just going to be playing hero ball all year, so I'll eat crow on that early. And kind of in the same breath, Anthony Richardson. I have to admit, Anthony Richardson, granted he only completed 9 passes, but they were some good fucking passes. The fact that he's just chucking it downfield, it's like, I recognize that Anthony Richardson is a fantasy superstar when he's on the field, kind of regardless of his play. The thing is, though, I really am worried about him being able to stay healthy all year, relying on guys like Alec Pierce. Now, granted, he overthrew Adonai Mitchell on not 1 but 2 long touchdowns, which could have even made his day that much bigger. But that's when I'm going to eat some crow on right away. Bryce Young and Carolina in general. I thought Dave Canales was supposed to be the quarterback whisperer.
What in the fuck?
Like, come on. This team looked like absolute dog shit out there. Bryce Young looked completely lost. And what's very concerning about Bryce Young is his game isn't like based on really the physical metrics. It's not his arm. He's actually not even particularly fast, like for a little guy, because you would assume at his size that he plays like Kyler Murray, but Kyler Murray is a freak athletically compared to Bryce Young. Young, coming out of college, very much was tagged as like the mentalist. The whole thing was that his mental game was supposed to be superior, and he looks shot right now. He's throwing bad interceptions, kind of regardless of. I know the offense isn't the greatest, but there was one with Adam Thielen kind of, found the crease within the zone, and Bryce Young just straight up overthrew it. Wasn't even really getting pressured that badly. Just kind of stepped into the throw, overthrew it by a mile, and it was intercepted. The score of the game honestly didn't even reflect how badly the Saints just beat the crap out of the Panthers. And I really expected them to not win, but at least be competitive. And for them to look that bad, granted, it's week 1. He could still evolve as the season stretches on. But, I thought, they've added to the line. They've added a wide receiver. Jonathan Brooks will eventually come in. I mean, this running game looks like a mess without Jonathan Brooks, and I'm not confident how much sure he's going to really make it better when he does eventually come back. So we'll kind of have to keep an eye on that. Sam Darnold, I thought he could be mediocre, but he looked like he was cooking. Now, pretty easy matchup for the most part, but I still think that I'm willing to say that I was wrong on Sam Darnold, because I definitely, in some deeper dynasty leagues, I've been stashing some shares of Nick Mullins, kind of betting against him. Running back Ramondre Stevenson gets all my love. Shout out to Sir Football. He was running like Marshawn Lynch, shifty and powerful as hell. Yes, he was. I'm not eating crow on that one. That's going to be in the next segment. And what's up, Jack? What's up, Albert? So glad to have you in the chat. Glad you guys could all join me again. Apologies for my voice here. I am definitely under the weather, but I couldn't leave you guys hanging, so I had to come in and do the show anyways. But yeah, we'll take a couple victory laps before we get into the hearts and farts.
That's the kind of person to say a toe-to-so, but you know what? A toe-to-so. A fucking a toe-to-so.
So the biggest one for me, if you've been following me this offseason, I have been pounding the table for running backs, especially in that back half of the first round in 12-team leagues. If you were at 111, 112, I was saying don't be afraid to take two running backs here, especially if I was really into Saquon. Barkley was the pick that I was really saying. There is no way that Barkley doesn't smash with the Eagles. I mean, you look at what DeAndre Swift was able to do, and even with Jason Kelsey leaving the offensive line, they are still going to be a top 10 unit. And the center that they got to replace him is a capable center. And I was saying this in the offseason. And yeah, it was a really weird game because it was in Brazil. But I think we all saw that come to fruition, especially like the fact that it was on such a shitty field, I think means that we could see potentially even greater things, like the way that they utilize Saquon in every facet of the offense too. Like the first touchdown, he looked like a wide receiver. It was an incredible game for Saquon. And so, that's an early victory lap that I've been taking. But just running backs in general, I was saying load up early on the running backs. By the time you get out of the 10th round, all of these guys that you're going to be trying to get super late, there's a good chance that they're not going to pan out. And we saw like the workhorse running backs kind of emerged on week one. So granted, very early running backs, we know the history. So not tooting my horn too loud on that one. But for week one, it looks like really good start. Stephon Diggs is one that I was saying that I feel the way that the Houston Texans wide receivers are going to break down is Nico Collins is going to be kind of that big play wide receiver who is playing more on the outside. Stephon Diggs will find his way in and out of the slot, and Tank Dell, as good as he is, unfortunately, is going to be the one that I think kind of gets left out in the cold some weeks. And we saw that come to fruition week one. We'll see how that continues to progress for the rest of the season. But if you are someone who took the risk on Stephon Diggs, 2 touchdowns in week one, I think that is, absolute money. And I know some people are already saying, oh, trade him early. I would hold on to him. Again, this is the Stephon Diggs year. He is going to be good, I think, all season for this year. Houston, with the addition of Joe Mixon now, especially, the Super Bowl window is wide open for them if the defense is able to take a real step forward by the end of the year. Arguably, they are much more of a dark horse, so don't hear what I'm not saying. Like the Chiefs are still very much the favorite to win the AFC, but if you're looking at teams that can compete, obviously the Ravens. I don't know about the Bills come playoff time, but then you look at the Texans. That's a maybe, honestly, with Nico and Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell and Joe Mixon just taking the load at the running back, which we'll get to a little bit later. And then the last thing I'll touch on, 2 of my favorite rookie wide receivers showing out week one, Brian Thomas Jr. Again, I've been very enamored with Brian Thomas Jr. I had him ranked even ahead of Rome and Dunn's pre-draft. That's how much I loved him. I would have taken him behind only MHJ and Malik Neighbors. Again, we'll talk about the former of those later. But yeah, I love BTJ. And the other one was Lad McConkey. Shout out to my guy, HoofTube at HoofTube. Make sure you give him a follow if you aren't already. One of the most fashionable people in all of fantasy. But yes, we have an ongoing bet of Ladd McConkey versus JSN, and it is extremely early, but I'm winning that bet right now, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself about Ladd McConkey. But yeah, since we're feeling so good right now, and to give my voice a little break here, let's get right into the hearts. Oh, so starting with the quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson, Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Derek Carr, Jaden Daniels, Jordan Love. Oh, pour one out for Jordan Love. And then rounding out your top 10, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, and CJ Stroud. So a lot of familiar faces in the top 10 guys that were drafted earlier. I think the only one there really, Derek Carr, standing up for us, late quarterback drafters. There were some other guys that were serviceable, but they definitely did not, win you the week or anything like that. So you did have to invest in quarterback, and obviously Jordan Love. The only information or news that I've heard about Jordan Love is that the injury is not season ending, one would hope. I've heard MCL bandied about. I'm not exactly sure. Again, I'm not a doctor. Hashtag not a doctor. I didn't think I need to clarify that, but hey, what the fuck? But yeah, Jordan Love should miss 3 to 6 weeks. Who fucking knows? It sucks. This sucks. But we'll get into some waivers later. But not really much to talk about here on the quarterbacks. Really, in the running backs is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Again, Saquon, Barkley, Joe Mixon, your number 1 and number 2 running backs on the week. And then JK, 2 legs. He's got 2 legs again, guys. J.K. Dobbins. The story for J.K. Dobbins is tremendous. Using the Ravens backfield from 2 years ago in Los Angeles with the old coach there, Gus, whatever his fucking name is. Not Harbaugh, but the Greg Roman. That's it. Yeah, Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator. But yeah, J.K. Dobbins had a really nice game, and it's funny. I see people talking shit on Twitter like, "Oh, he couldn't close those touchdowns." It's like he hit 19 miles per hour on that run. And it's like, yeah, NFL defenders. Hey, turns out they're really fast, you guys. That's why they get drafted. So yeah, a lot of those guys are like as fast as the wide receivers, and yeah, they can catch J.K. Dobbins from behind. It's crazy how that works. But he still looked awesome. Obviously, 10 carries for 100-plus yards and a touchdown. And then Ramonster Stevenson, Sir Football in the chat, already talking up Ramondre Stevenson, had a huge workload. Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones, Devon Achane, James Conner, Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard especially really funny to me. I should have put that in the shit I was right about because fucking Tyjae Spears. Oh, man, I love dunking on Tyjae Spears.
Do you want to see me dunk?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Are you guys ready? I'm okay. Don't worry.
Does that always happen?
Yeah, it does. Tyjae Spears always lets you down. But yeah, Tony Pollard had a nice game. David Montgomery, Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, Jahmyr Gibbs, Isaiah Pacheco, and didn't quite crack that top 10, but Bijan Robinson got a huge workload. And the only reason he didn't do much with it is the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is still very fucking good, especially when TJ Watt is healthy. Who would have thunk it, huh? But yeah, not really much to talk about there except J.K. Dobbins, who will be a hot ad on waiver wires in shallower leagues. He's probably already added in a lot of deeper leagues. But otherwise, almost every name I read to you there went in single-digit rounds of fantasy football drafts. Kind of the later, when you talk about the guys that were drafted later, like Mixon even was like round 5 to 6 usually. You can talk about like Kamara and Aaron Jones and like James Conner. They were all going around like rounds 8 to 9-ish, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, again, these are pretty well-known fantasy football names. I think Jerome Ford, was a very obvious sleeper to a lot of people because of Nick Chubb being missing. So even he was driven up the board a little bit. Like there's no guys that I'm seeing here that were like last round picks, except for like maybe JK Two Legs. For the wide receivers, can't believe he was number 1. It was a crazy game, but Jayden Reed finished number 1. Again, this was sorry, I didn't say it off the top. That's what makes this the worst fantasy show, but this is all based on half PPR scoring. Full PPR would tilt things a little bit. I prefer half PPR for relaying information. I feel like it's still a little bit more generic, I guess. So yeah, kind of splits the difference too. But in half PPR, Jayden Reed, Tyreek Hill, Jameson Williams. That was a nice sleeper hit for a lot of people. Alec Pierce. Everyone had Alec Pierce finishing top 5 this week, right? That's what makes fantasy football ridiculous. Cooper Kupp, AJ Brown, Rashid Shaheed, Mike Evans, Xavier Worthy, Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin. Keep an eye on Chris Godwin. I've been smashing Godwin into all my DFS lineups. You saw Cooper Kupp just ravage Detroit kind of out of the slot. Chris Godwin just went 8 for 83 and a touch. He's got Detroit next week. I've been smashing Godwin early. Nico Collins, Ashton Doolin, Jaylen Waddle, Justin Jefferson. And then just to kind of throw shout outs to Rashee Rice, BTJ, Ladd McConkey, and Brandon Cooks also had serviceable games. And then tight end. Tight end was something else this week.
Go fuck yourself.
That is every fantasy manager clutching onto their elite tight end. The only tight end that scored over 15 fantasy points, and it was Isaiah Likely, had 25 fantasy points. So he was actually a game breaker if somehow you slipped him into your lineup in your 32-team league. But most people had him on the bench or on waivers, which we'll, again, talk about a little bit later. And then Foster Moreau. Anybody remember Foster Moreau and his connection with Derek Carr and how that was supposed to be a thing? Also, what the fuck? Jawan Johnson was also on this list somehow. I thought he was supposed to be injured and missing week 1. What the fuck happened there? Not talking about Jawan Johnson's Wolverine powers enough. But actually ahead of Jawan Johnson with a clean 10.1 points in half PPR, Kyle Pitts. Hey, the curse is over. We're not going to do the Kyle Pitts segment this week. That carried us through last year. Who scored more than Kyle Pitts this week? There were only 2 names. They were funny, but since it was only Foster the People Moreau, and Isaiah Likely to succeed, wasn't that much to go off of. So Kyle Pitts finished number 3. That should tell you how bad the tight end position was this week, that he finished number 3 with 10.1. Juwan Johnson, Brock Bowers, Chigo Okonkwo, Colby Parkinson, my guy Colby, the sleeper of all sleepers. Sam Laporta, David Njoku, who unfortunately suffered an injury, high ankle sprain. So that's going to be rough. And then Trey McBride rounded it out, the top 10, with a whole 5.5 fantasy points. Sexy.
Drop that, yeet, skirt that, yeet, pop that, yeet, hey.
And because we like to talk about defense on this show, we also have the defense here, the top 5 defensive scorers, the Chicago Bears, which shout out to me, by the way, on the Sunday morning live show, 9 a.m. So you guys are going to want to jump on those shows, the 9 a.m. shows. Early bird doth catch thy worm. Someone asked me for streaming defense And even above the Saints, who still made this list, I took the Bears. And I said, word for word, if there's one player on this list that I think can turn the ball over, it's Will Levis. And, well, that happened. So the Bears, the Vikings, the Cowboys, the Saints, and the Chargers. And then also very serviceable games from the Pats, the Steelers, and the Seahawks. Whew. All right, before we get into the farts, which is basically your duds, we got a question in the chat. Shout out to Christian Reyes. Yo, what's your thoughts on Amon-Ra? And if I could get Mixon and Debo for him, do I? Ooh. Damn. Killing me early, eh? Obviously, I'm not concerned about Amon-Ra at all. It was just a weird game. Like, it's Amon-Ra. He's one of the most consistent wide receivers in fantasy football. This happens to every wide receiver. Just normally doesn't happen to Amon-Ra. And to have it happen week one in a primetime game feels especially bad. So I'm not trying to sell him by any means. But Joe Mixon, after clearly identifying himself as like a true workhorse running back for a top 5 offense with CJ Stroud in the gang. If I could get my hands on Mixon and Debo, I think Debo is still going to be very serviceable this year. The problem is I'm not willing really to give up Amon-Ra because I still think Amon-Ra is a top 5 wide receiver by the end of the year. Oh, man. It's tantalizing. The only way I would do this is if it was like a 10-man standard league starting 2 wide receiver. That's like we're getting hyper specific, but in any half PPR format, even a standard scoring format that has 3 wide receiver slots that you have to fill every week, like I'm keeping Amon-Ra in all those situations. But again, if you're like in that one random league that's, oh, this is a 10-man league and it's standard scoring and we only start 2 wide receiver and we actually have 2 flex, meaning I could start 2 running back and, 2 more running back theoretically. Like, yeah, I might consider that trade, to be honest, but that's, again, it's pretty out there. All right, let's get into the farts.
Come on, don't bullshit me. Bullshit. 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 You said so. So bullshit.
Man, these are the guys that let us down, the quarterbacks. Voldemort has been sent back into the dirt. If you don't know who Voldemort is, that is Deshaun Watson, the most hated man in the NFL, apparently. But these are all guys that finished under 10 fantasy points, and so they really blew up your week if for some reason you started Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Joe Burrow, Caleb Williams, Daniel Jones, and Jacoby Brissett. If you started any of those names in Superflex particularly, because obviously in single quarterback, the only name on that list that should have been in your lineups theoretically would be like maybe Burrow, or if you're just really excited about Caleb Williams, I get it. But and then guys that were serviceable but not great, like they were still disappointing, like Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, and Gardner Minshew. And then Kyler Murray and Justin Fields were also just kind of meh. For running back, Devin Singletary, DeAndre Swift, Tyjae Spears, Chase Brown, Gus Bus, Zamir White, Javonte Williams, Raheem Mostert, Jaylen Warren. Yo, that's another one. I told you guys. I done told you guys about Jaylen Warren. If you've been following this show, you should have 0% shares of Jaylen Warren. And if you have them, then that's at your own peril. I warned you. Arthur Smith, not a thing. Najee, even though it was technically a bad game offensively, because that's just every game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had 20 carries for 70 yards. Like, Najee is the guy in this offense. They're going to lean on him. It's going to be gross. They're going to just, again, lean on Najee and play gross defense, and that's Steelers football. So if you think Jaylen Warren is just going to be a useful, receiving back flex option week in, week out, I'm telling you, you got fool's gold on your hands. So let him pop for a good game and get rid of him. Chuba Hubbard, also, that sucked. For the wide receivers, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Christian Watson, Zay Flowers, the Dortch, Greg Dortch. That was actually like one of the better games on this list, which that's how it tells you how rough it was in these wide receiver streets. Jacoby Myers, Tank Dell, any Bears wide receiver, Calvin Ridley, any Seahawks wide receiver. Like, honestly, Tyler Lockett, I think, had the best line, and it wasn't that great. Puka Nacua, that one, unfortunately, he got hurt. The knee's going to take him out week to week, so keep an eye on that. We'll talk about that in waivers a little bit. Adam Thielen actually had like 3 for 60, which was one of the better receiving performances on his team. But yeah, Bryce Young looks shot right now. And Deontay Johnson had an even worse line. Rashad Bateman, people were trying to make Rashad Bateman a thing. Still not a thing. Cortland Sutton, Jordan Addison. Addison also got injured, so keep an eye on that. Terry McLaurin, Josh Palmer, kind of a deep sleeper, also got ejected. So Ladd McConkey, definitely the guy for the Chargers. I think that's just going to grow as the season grows. Andre Yoshivas, I only put him on this list because someone asked if they should start him over. It was like literal studs. Like it was like CeeDee Lamb and like Amari Cooper, and Amari Cooper didn't have a good game either. But like you don't get cute like that week one. That's why I wanted to put it on this list. And then tight end, we already talked about every elite tight end, basically. Like Kyle Pitts was the number 3 scoring tight end on the whole week with 10, and the only guys in front of him were Foster Moreau and Isaiah Likely. So that should tell you how the tight ends performed this week. It was a big ol' and then on defense, the Cincinnati Bengals just came out like a wet fart too. I kind of had recommended them as a potential streaming defense against what I thought would be a pretty myopic Patriots offense, and it was just that Ramondre Stevenson kind of ran all over this Bengals defense, which is the way to beat them, is by the run, because if they get up on you early and start hitting you with the pass rush, their defense isn't that bad. But when you just run on them, yeah, they look rough. But this was a really bad performance all around, but on defense as well. The Houston Texans, I thought, maybe Anthony Richardson turns the ball over a couple times. He really didn't, even though he wasn't efficient. I think he only had the 1 interception, so it wasn't a great defensive performance for fantasy. The Buccaneers, and then, there weren't actually that many defenses that went under double digits. Ironically enough, it was kind of the big name defenses. And this is why, again, shout out to the crowd of you don't draft defense, you stream defense. It's like, yeah, if you drafted the Bills, the Eagles, the Chiefs, or the Ravens, those are all the teams that went under 10 fantasy points in week 1. And a big reason is because obviously the Chiefs and the Ravens played each other. And then the Bills and the Eagles, they played really good offenses in the Arizona Cardinals and the Green Bay Packers. And so they gave up a lot of points. It's like, yeah, that's why the teams I was streaming was like, the Bengals were the one that I was wrong on, but otherwise it was Bears, Seahawks, and Vikings. And all 3 of those worked out swimmingly. So yeah, stream your defenses. All right, before we get the hell out of here, let's hit the waiver wire.
The fuck? The fuck? The fuck is in the air. The fuck? There's white shit everywhere. The fuck? I must be fucking baked and this shit's probably fake. The fucking hell did I just take? The fuck?
All right, so in quarterback, again, I took this from a list in my 12-team leagues, kind of went and looked in the waivers for those leagues and just kind of chalked it up to that. They're pretty competitive leagues, so I feel like the waiver should be pretty appropriate. But for quarterback, again, single quarterback, if you're really hurting, you just lost Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield should be there. He's the one that I'm dumping most of my fab on up to. Don't put a bid in for 25, but like I would be willing to consider up to 25% of my budget. But I would probably honestly throw like 13 to 17. I try to use odd numbers like that so that you're not putting like $10 bid and getting outbid by $11. So that's just kind of one of my things, but I'd be willing to go up to like about a quarter of my budget if I just lost Jordan Love. If it's a deeper league, like 12 to 14 teams, somehow Baker's there because it's single quarterback, I'm making that play. A little bit, kind of more boring of an option, but I think obviously outperformed expectations. Derek Carr, Justin Fields, if he's out there floating, should be picked up. He's a running quarterback. No matter how bad he performs passing, the running quarterbacks unfortunately can sometimes break fantasy football, so he should definitely be owned. As far as super flex leagues, I would throw Sam Howell on the end of my bench. I would definitely have Jameis Winston on my bench. I would throw Nick Mullins maybe on my bench, even though Sam Darnold looked a lot better than expected. I'm still kind of, sometimes I feel like I can't let go of a feeling I have about a player because it's like you've shown me who you are for so long. Like I get that you had one really good game against kind of a mediocre defense, but I would need to see a little bit more before I'm very comfortable with Sam Darnold on a season-long trajectory. But yeah, I'd throw a couple of those guys on my bench for Superflex. For running back, main targets are going to be Bucky Irving for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously had a role in spite of Rachaad White, which is always what I look for when I'm trying to pick up running backs on the wire, is guys that are getting on the field irregardless of the starter, because it tells me that they're talented. And if, God forbid, anything happens to the starter, then that guy's just going to accumulate an even bigger workload. So Bucky Irving should definitely be owned in 12 to 14 team leagues. I really like Emmanuel Wilson. I don't know how long it's going to take for Marshawn Lloyd to come back. Irregardless, they lost thick hamstring boy for the entire year, and all they've got is Josh Jacobs, who looked like he was running in mud. Now, he did kind of start to look better by the end of the game. That is kind of a Josh Jacobs thing, is like, he does start to wear on a defense. And obviously, if they don't have Jordan Love, I think they're going to lean on the running backs even more. But I thought Emmanuel Wilson had like some nice burst and some nice plays and could have looked even better if he wasn't playing on such a shit-tacular field. So, assuming that they're going to be playing stateside the rest of the year, which they are, I think he could have some decent games. And then Miles Sanders. Oh, Miles Sanders is back in our lives. He out-touched Chuba Hubbard. He's going to be involved, unfortunately, in really deep leagues. I might throw him just on the end of my bench and kind of see what happens, because Jonathan Brooks still probably 5 to 7 weeks away from relevance. Like even 5 weeks, I think he comes back from PUP. But then it's like he's not going to be ready, I think, as like the moment he comes off of PUP. So we'll kind of see how that plays in, but that's like half a season, so it's so gross. But running backs are always hurting. For wide receiver, a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel here for the wide receivers. We've got Snack Hollins. I don't actually think Mack Hollins is a thing. I just wanted to put his name on here because I always wanted him to be a thing for the Falcons. But it just kind of didn't really develop. I thought he could be kind of a viable number 2. I think he could. He's replaced Gabe Davis in this offense. So I think there will be games in really deep leagues where Mack Hollins is relevant. But I'm talking way too much about this. This was more of a joke than anything. The guys you actually want to target, Wan'Dale Robinson for the Giants had 12 targets. Demarcus Robinson, he's the third wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. If Puka Nacua is going to miss time, he's going to become relevant. Josh Reynolds and Devon Vale for the Denver Broncos, Reynolds had like 5 for 60 and Vale had 8 receptions for like 30 yards. It's really gross, low end PPR volume, but they might be worth, again, throwing on the end of your bench in a 14-teamer. And the Dortch, kind of for shallower leagues. Greg Dortch should definitely be owned, had 6 for 47. He's concerning because I think he could fuck things up for Trey McBride. He's kind of stealing like a lot of the work that Trey McBride was seeing last year. So, we all thought, Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in, maybe take some targets, but it's actually the evolution of the Dortch that could end up, messing up Trey McBride as an elite tight end. So that's kind of scary. Speaking of tight end, Isaiah Likely is likely going to be the most expensive waiver ad of the entire year. You probably are not the person that's going to get him unless you have like David Njoku or Jake Ferguson, who are both unfortunately injured. Njoku, high ankle sprain, could miss 4 to 6 weeks potentially just based on high ankle sprain in general, like in the history of high ankle sprains. I think it could be anywhere from like 3 to 6 weeks. Anyways. And then Fergie Licious, one of my favorite tight ends this year, unfortunately with an MCL sprain, I think it is, or I don't know. He's dealing with some knee issues now or some leg issues. It's not good. So unless like you're really desperate, like I don't know that I'm going to be the one spending 80 fab on Isaiah Likely. I would much rather spend my fab on Colby Parkinson. Colby Parkinson, if he's out there in your leagues, should 100% be owned. Again, you talk about the injury, unfortunately, with Puka Nacua in his knee. The role for the tight end already existed with the Rams. Parkinson, ironically enough, was in the top 10 because he was already serviceable as a tight end, as a deep sleeper. The fact that Puka could potentially miss some time and Demarcus Robinson is more of like a big play guy, I actually think Colby Parkinson could see even a little bit more volume, a little bit more targets, and be even more serviceable as a tight end. So he's someone I'm really like. I already have him in a lot of leagues, but in leagues I don't, I'm definitely targeting Colby Parkinson as a tight end too, or in a sleeper. Tucker Kraft, again, deeper leagues, but I think he looked better than Luke Musgrave, so I would add him. And then Chig Okonkwo. This is one where you talk about a guy who's had the unrealized potential year in and year out that people keep adding. It's like if he can kind of become really the go-to in terms of like behind Calvin Ridley when DeAndre Hopkins isn't there, Okonkwo maybe has some value in deeper leagues. It's still going to be very hit or miss, especially with a quarterback like Will Levis. Like, and if you saw the play that Chase scored on, it was kind of crazy. Like he like leaned over the defender almost and like caught the ball just like purely on like size and athleticism. But Levis is the type to throw it up. So again, deeper leagues, don't mind the dart throw on the Okonkwo. And then on defense, some defensive teams I'll be targeting on waivers. The Chargers just laid waste to the Raiders, and they get the Panthers in week 2. So the Chargers could be a hot ad off waivers. The Commanders, probably the worst defense on this list, but they're going to play the Giants. So this is a immovable object meets irresistible force in reverse of like movable object meets resistible force when you talk about the Manders defense versus Daniel Jones. So we'll kind of see what happens there. The Houston Texans, their defense, even though Anthony Richardson had some crazy plays, for the most part looked pretty good. Again, kept him to 9 for 19. They did almost get burned on a couple other plays, but not many people are throwing like 60-yard, 70-yard bombs off their back foot like Anthony Richardson is. And as much as I love Caleb Williams, he definitely had his struggles in week 1. The Houston Texans will be at home against the Chicago Bears. I like that defense. And then Indianapolis Colts. aforementioned. They're going to be going on the road, but it's against Green Bay Packers, who just lost Jordan Love. And if they're going to be sticking with Malik Willis for this week, I will be definitely targeting some Colts defense in some DFS and as a streaming option. All right. Oh my God, I'm sick as a dog. I can't believe I made it through. Thank you so much to all of you out there watching. I super appreciate you guys. If you can super kick that subscribe button, appreciate it even more. But we will be back on Thursday with the Thursday matchups, all your matchups for week 2 and some streaming options like always. So until the next time, I will catch all of you guys on the flip side.
He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs at the 50. He runs at the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man. Here comes